Welcome to the Reawakening Ancient Feminine Wisdom and Pregnancy, Birth, and Motherhood Summit. I'm your host, Nancy Lucina, and today Debby Gould will be joining us. Debby originally trained and worked as a midwife and is now a childbirth educator, doula, and mother of two. Debby is a co-author of How to Heal a Bad Birth, Making Sense, Making Peace, and Moving On. She is also the primary facilitator of Birth Talks Healing from Birth meetings, as well as Birth Talks popular empowering birth education courses. She also works as a private birth consultant, offering individualized support for women and men healing after a traumatic birth, or for those working towards an empowering birth. In today's conversation, Debby shares how we can best prepare prenatally to reduce the likelihood of a traumatic experience, what the steps we can take to heal from a previous traumatic birth are, how we can eventually begin to find the gifts in these difficult experiences, and much more. Hi, everyone. Today we have with us Debby Gould from birthtalk.org. Thank you for being here with us, Debby.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So you specialize in helping women to heal from what you call a bad birth, a birth that maybe feels traumatic or difficult for them. My first question for you is, how can women prepare prenatally for birth in a way that we never know what's going to happen, right? When you go into birth, even if you prepare for a natural birth, something might go not as planned. I'm wondering if you have specific things that women can do so that if things don't go as planned, it doesn't feel traumatic.
Oh, absolutely. It's a bit hard to say it won't necessarily feel traumatic, but we certainly do have ideas on how to reduce the chance of feeling traumatized from your birth. I guess when we actually do a course called The Path to a Better Birth, and our focus is on wanting women to have a good experience of birth, wanting them to have a birth that can allow them to come through it feeling positive and empowered and confident to help that transition into motherhood. And now we know from all the work that we do with women who've had negative birth experiences that the most likely indicator of how they're going to feel afterwards or postnatally is how they felt during the birth. Mm-hmm. And the flip side of that is if they're feeling positive and they have a good birth experience in terms of they felt good throughout their birth experience, that means that regardless of what path it takes, they can come through feeling confident and positive going into motherhood. So what we mean by that, a good birth and a bad birth, as I said, is to do with the feelings. So we're working with women to that you feel supported, so expert knowledge into your own body is being listened to, and that you feel respected. Now, what can we do to make sure that happens? Now, the upside of that is when women are feeling like that in birth and the environment is supportive, usually the birth is as straightforward and safe as possible as well. Mm-hmm. But it's important that they know that regardless of what path it takes, it can still be a positive experience. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's certain things that may be missed out on if it's, say, they have a cesarean versus a natural birth. There's certain hormonal things and physiological things that have been missed, mm-hmm. but there's a lot we can do to replicate those and to try and make up for that and to bring forth the gifts that can happen hormonally afterwards.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. If anybody's watching who has had what they feel is a bad birth or a traumatic birth, a really difficult experience, what are their first steps that they can take to begin to heal that?
Well, I guess the first step is that awareness. So, having these sort of programs out there are fantastic for women to sort of really think about their birth, because it's a very isolating experience, a traumatic birth, because our culture makes women go underground a lot, I guess would be a way to put it. Yeah. There's very much the idea, healthy mother, healthy baby, all these sorts of cultural silver linings, so to speak, are very unacknowledging to women, because often they are very grateful if they have a healthy baby, but how they feel about how they met that baby is very separate. They're totally separate things. So the first thing, I guess, is that awareness and recognizing that how you feel about your birth is totally separate to how you feel about your baby. And it's okay, and it's very real if you've got feelings that aren't great about your birth. And that is usually because it's a normal response to something abnormal, something that you shouldn't have had to go on through the way that you did. So,
Right.
this next two steps that we talk about are acknowledgement and validation. So once you have this awareness, it's important that you get a chance to debrief this and to talk to people who understand that birth matters, have an understanding of birth in itself, and have empathy, and I guess also have some ideas on how to support you. And this is where women get stuck often, because they may voice something about their birth, or it may just bubble over at a barbecue or a friend's dinner.
Right.
And a lot of people are like, oh, wow, that was 2 years ago. Why are you talking about that? So they often get closed down. So the next step is finding the right people, and which can be tricky. And, we've written a book called How to Heal a Bad Birth, Making Sense, Making Peace and Moving On. And in that book, we have about 80 women and men who are quoted in that book. So I think, one, understanding that birth will have an impact, and two, that they're not alone, and hearing all these other women and men actually say the same things they're saying, and then can be very validating and make them feel that it's not just them and they're just not coping, or which is a common sort of feel. And then beyond that acknowledgement and validation, then that's when there's needing some understanding about birth and everything that went on, and processing it. And then that's one layer gone. There might be something else underneath that. So awareness, acknowledgement, validation, processing, and understanding.
Yeah.
So, it can take a few. Sorry, I was going to say that process can be like with onion. There are all layers, so layer and then a different emotion relating to your experience may come up after that.
Right.
Eventually, each layer goes and it gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and sometimes it can take a while. And I wonder if you run across women who don't even realize that they had, or that they are still healing from a birth experience until maybe they are pregnant again, for example. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's quite common, and there's probably a couple of reasons for it. One is the cultural belief around birth. So in Australia and I think it's fairly similar in a lot of Western countries, there's a feeling that birth is this horrible, hard thing that women have to go through to meet a baby. And we would argue that certainly isn't the case. There's actually a lot of gifts and a lot of value that can come from birth from women to transition them into motherhood. But that's not how it's generally perceived. So there's a lot of women who just think, well, that's just birth, and I just must not be able to cope with it. Everyone else must be fine. And what we would say, well, no, that's not the case. And secondly, when you have a baby, it's a pretty big learning curve, and you're kind of in survival mode initially, and there really isn't often, unless it's unavoidable, a great amount of time to sit there and really think about things and sit on the floor and cry for 3 hours. You just don't have that opportunity. So women get very good at burying it. They get very good with, suck it up and just move on.
Right.
But they don't, in essence, move on, because trauma doesn't go away. It actually has to be processed. Otherwise, we see things like flashbacks and nightmares, and that's the brain's way of saying, we have something that needs to be resolved here. I don't know what to do with this, so I'm bringing it back up for you. But women can be very successful at burying it. There's a lot of fear. There's lots of feelings of guilt about feeling bad about the day that their baby was born. it often can be feelings of failure, and so they can suppress it quite well. But obviously, if they fall pregnant again, then it becomes very real, and they sort of often, it will come up that they have unresolved issues around that. But we would ideally like them to be able to process that, whether they're having future babies or not, to be able to find a place of peace, because we find that when they're operating at that surface level, because they're burying the negative emotions, they can't go too deep into any of their emotions. So we find that they often are missing a lot of the joy as well, and that's something they shouldn't be missing out on.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great point.
It's also sorry,
No, go ahead.
say, as you said, future pregnancies, but also another common time that it comes up for women is around the birthdays of their children.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and also even right down the track. So we've had grandmothers coming back and talking to us and coming to our healing groups because their daughter's pregnant, and they're saying, okay, all this stuff's coming up for me and I don't want to put that onto her, and I need some processing to do. So we really do see evidence that it doesn't tend to go away unless it's had a chance to exist.
Right. And once you do go through that healing process, does it actually go away? Or how are you able to look back on your birth once you, for example, go through one of your programs and have a successful feeling? What is the feeling that women have after that?
I think for a lot of women, what they're telling us their experience is that the intensity goes, and they find peace with it, and so it doesn't keep coming up for them at inopportune times. It doesn't come up for them very much at all. It's been processed and understood and made sense of to a point that it can kind of be filed. It doesn't mean that they think, oh, this is something I should have had to go through. It doesn't mean that they forget it, but it doesn't have power over their life anymore. They feel at peace with it, and they often start to find, I guess, the joy and gifts through going through the process, not gifts from the birth, because I don't think any woman should have to go through a traumatic birth, to be the better person they are.
Right.
But for a lot of women, that whole process of healing and exploring all of that often means that they can do that in other aspects of their lives, and they feel like they're going forward empowered, which is what we'd like ideally from the birth initially, for them to feel empowered, but they feel down the track empowered in a different way. And it's just a memory. It's no longer a major part of their life.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, I remember reading, I think, something on your blog, and I thought that was really beautifully said. How maybe some people are watching who had what looked like on the surface a perfect birth. Maybe it was this beautiful natural home birth, but for whatever reason, there's something that feels off about that. And yeah, I know you mentioned it doesn't have to look a certain way for it to be a, quote, bad birth, right? What's
Absolutely
been your experience with that?
Well, I think obviously there's overt things that can happen in birth, which very upsetting and disappointing, but often it's really easy to see that would have been traumatic. Sometimes those women get a little bit more support afterwards because it's a bit more evident to people, but often they still don't. There's still the, oh my goodness, you lost one twin, but at least one survived. So there's still that not going there and looking into and letting women express what's going on for them. But more than that, probably the vast majority of the women that we see, and they might run along the whole spectrum of being disappointed about what didn't happen, right through to being traumatized, or those things combined. And usually it's more to do with how they felt during it, because we need to understand that women, when they're birthing, are incredibly vulnerable. They're not the same, it's not a normal, well, it is a normal situation, but it's not a situation that we're in all the time. We're vulnerable physically, we're vulnerable emotionally, and we're actually vulnerable hormonally. Our hormones are primed to assess whether we're safe, they're primed to try and make us feel happy, to be dependent on the people around us. And if we can't do those things, it actually causes issues in our laboring and our emotional experience of it. So so for a lot of women with that vulnerability, it's very easy that they end in our health system. It's very easy for their expert role to get lost in amongst everybody else's expertise. It's very easy for them to feel powerless and helpless, and it doesn't have to be huge things. It's very easy for them to feel scared, or to feel abandoned, or to feel unacknowledged, all those sort of feelings. And if any of us felt those feelings in a really vulnerable time in any part of our life, because pregnancy and birth really is a life experience. It's transitioning a woman from being a woman into a mother, or into a mother into a mother of two. And if any other life experience, they were the common themes that we felt. If that was our childhood, that we felt unacknowledged and powerless and scared and helpless and unable to ask questions and all those sorts of things, we don't move into adulthood feeling happy and healthy. We have to process that, because we're not meant to feel like that going through that transition.
Right.
And it's exactly the same thing for women who go through birth or pregnancy, birth, or the postnatal experience. Feeling those feelings, they don't move on confident and prepared for the next stage. They have to process those feelings that shouldn't have been the main theme of that life transition. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I mean, just with my own birth story, to keep things a bit short, I had a planned home birth and transferred at the very end. My baby ended up coming out naturally, and on the surface, everybody would say that was a great birth, but I definitely didn't feel that way because of these certain aspects that you're talking about. And one of them was around the feeling of somehow being abandoned at one point in my labor. This is before I knew about hiring a doula and all this stuff that I know now, right? But I definitely had to take a lot of time to work through that, and it wasn't really until a couple of years later, when I took my doula training, that all of that began to come to the surface, and I saw how that feeling was making itself known in different areas of my life, and so then I had to work to find my power again in those ways. And there are a lot of gifts in that process, as you say, because I think that what ultimately ends up happening is that you meet your power again, that's wrapped up in the sadness, that's wrapped up in the disappointment. And I think really for women, it's beating themselves up, somehow this guilt, as you're saying, that when we can peel off those layers, we can find that power. And that empowerment is what this summit is all about, really, for me. Reawakening that feminine wisdom, that empowerment that lives within us, really regardless of what is happening outside of ourselves. But it takes work sometimes to find it again if these things have happened. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's one of the probably one of the best gifts that birth can give, is when you have a good birth, is that empowerment and that strength, and that it's just such a gift going forward into motherhood. And it's a gift that we're meant to get. There's a lot of things that are built into it that are meant to make that transition a lot easier. And so there's so many women who not only are carrying the baggage of a traumatic birth or a disappointing or challenging birth, they're also behind the eight ball and not getting the gifts and the support they were meant to get going into motherhood. So it can make those early, not just the early days, it's just a very hard journey to take on many levels. And I guess that's what we're about, is about empowered birth, whatever path it takes. And if we're focusing on those good birth feelings, then whatever path it takes, it can be a positive experience, and we can come out feeling confident.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that a little bit? I definitely try to work with that as well when I am helping women prepare for birth. Like, okay, it might go this way, it might go that way. So how can you meet those core desired feelings inside that you're really wanting? Is that kind of what you're talking about? That each woman has their own desired feelings that they want to feel at their birth, and you work toward that regardless of how it takes? Or
I think it's more that making sure rather than the feelings they're wanting. I mean, it's absolutely important to hear what they're wanting from their birth beforehand, but
Mhm.
more it's just that taking care of their emotional health.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Okay.
making but as I said, I often say there's two lots of gifts from birth. One is the empowerment, and
Mhm.
one is the physiological gifts. And if we can try and maximize both of those, no matter what happens, we're going to
Mhm.
give the woman's going to have the best birth she can possibly have.
Mhm.
Now, the upside for those women who are wanting a natural birth is that if we support that emotional, then the physiological side, the body works very, very well. So the body is
Mhm.
very clever and works very well when it feels safe and supported. So we're
Mm.
actually enhancing safety and enhancing the chance of what they're wanting. And if we have a woman who would like to have an elective cesarean, for example, we can say,
Mhm.
okay, well, we still need to make sure that this is a positive experience and you feel confident and empowered through it.
Mm.
And we need you to understand that some of these hormonal things are being missed, so that you don't, so you're kind to yourself if you notice that if it's not everything you imagine that it would have been, and that you understand so you can replicate and do lots of things to try and enhance the hormonal gifts,
Mm.
things like skin to skin contact, or
Right.
breastfeeding, not being separated from the baby, all sorts of
Yep.
things. So most women that we support would go into a birth saying, I want to support my body. I know how to support my body to work well. I know what's an environment's needed for that. I know and I feel supported in decision making, and I'm
Mhm.
going to go forth and support my body to birth the best way it can. And if things come up and I have to make decisions, then I feel capable and confident in doing so. And they still might, if they have to make decisions that they didn't want, they still
Mhm.
might have grief around their experience, but
Right.
they won't have trauma. And they'll also
Okay.
understand what they're
Yeah.
grieving. And if they know I'm grieving that I didn't get this, and I didn't get my baby up onto my chest all wet and gooey, and
Right.
that my baby was separated, and all these sorts of things, if they have an understanding of why that's so important, it allows them to be able to grieve it really easily, because
Uh-huh.
they can, well, no wonder I'm sad because I missed out on this and this and this, and it allows them to move through that grief quicker than them feeling terribly sad but not understanding why they feel sad, because I have a healthy
Right.
baby but I feel so sad. What's wrong with me?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. And this phrase that always gets thrown around at women, which is, "Oh, but your baby's healthy and all that matters," just further adds to those.
Silencing them.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. I
And those
wanted,
feelings. Mm.
yeah, I wanted to ask you because I think sometimes when women are going through postpartum difficulties, if they've had a hard birth, they might, sometimes I think what's helpful for them is just that they don't feel alone or that they don't feel crazy in feeling how they feel. So I'm wondering if you could talk to those women about specific patterns you have noticed if a woman has a difficult traumatic birth. What are some normal things that might show up within that first year?
It can show up in different ways. So some women, they will feel it straight away. So they will feel, usually with trauma, it's more a feeling of anxiety. Um, they will feel sad. So those emotions will come up straight away. But for the majority, as I was saying before, it can take some time because of that whole survival mode that we're in. Um, I guess, from a trauma point of view, often women will start showing symptoms of trauma. So they will be having flashbacks, nightmares. they just can't let it go. They keep just going over it and over it in their head, and it just pops up when they don't expect. So if that's happening, that's a clue. Your mind is saying, please help me look at this and process this. But obviously you need to feel safe and supported to do that. Other things that come up very regularly is, often they can feel hypervigilant. So they'll be checking on the baby continually. They'll have the baby and they won't want to give the baby away to anyone at all.
Right.
And in saying that, there's some real benefits keeping mothers and babies together in the early days.
Sure.
Not handing them around to everybody, but there's real fierceness, this real just kind of get away, or just this real fear for their baby, needing to check on them time and time again. Now that's a classic response to feeling powerless and feeling out of control. So it makes sense if you've been very vulnerable, you feel incredibly you felt powerless and helpless, that once you're out of that situation, you're going to say, well, I'm going to try and control everything now because I don't want to ever feel like that again.
I see.
So that hypervigilance is a really normal response to feeling powerless. So women who find that they're a bit too, they think, okay. Another thing that comes up fairly regularly is kind of the opposite of that hypervigilance, is whereas women just lacking confidence. So, when you're so disempowered and you've had a negative experience, often they don't feel confident to make decisions for their babies, and they're always asking other people or handing over decision making to other people because they've just been disempowered throughout the whole process. So they don't feel very confident with mothering. They've also, if women have had a negative experience emotionally, let alone what's gone on physiologically, often the hormones are interfered with, and the hormones of mothering, like prolactin and the reason the hormones are interfered with is that adrenaline is part of that cocktail, and if we have excessive amounts, we start to change the cocktail.
Right.
And so for a lot of women, they're also missing that kind of maternal instinct, and they think that that's just, there's no such thing, or they're just not very maternal, where in fact it's usually a response to what they've been through, that they're not feeling that. Sometimes they feel numb because they're suppressing everything, and they feel they can't go into the deep feelings with their babies. So often they'll feel that they love their baby, they don't feel this deep connection that they feel like they should. They feel like something's missing there. And that again is a very normal response, because as I said before, if you're shutting down emotionally, you can't get the good, because you're trying to protect yourself from the bad, but the good's not coming up as well. So that's very common. What am I thinking? What else? Feelings of disappointment or emptiness, like I was saying before, that sadness and not knowing why. Often anger at partners, even though they know that perhaps their partner couldn't do anything, but they're still angry that they didn't save them, perhaps. Or so they're all common feelings. I guess some other things that women will say down the track that triggered that they may have had something to process is things like driving past the hospital and finding that really difficult, somebody telling them about their birth and not being able to hear it, feeling just that avoidance type behavior as well. So but I guess for them, if any of them are feeling that, I'd say they're all really normal responses to an abnormal situation that you were in. And so getting some understanding around that and being able to process that can allow you to start to release it, rather than thinking that there's actually something wrong with you, because there's absolutely not. It's just, you just need some support to work through it.
Right. Exactly. So for anyone who may be watching who has experienced any of those things, I highly recommend going to birthtalk.org, and I'd love to give you a chance to explain right now some of your offerings that you have for women around the world, and about your book, a little bit about your book as well, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we have our website that you've mentioned. Thank you for that. And on that website, there's women's stories and experiences. So that might be a good place just to get a feel for what we're about. We also have a blog called Truth About Traumatic Birth. We have We're on Facebook with Birth Talk, and then also with our book, How to Heal a Bad Birth, Making Sense, Making Peace and Moving On. I'll show you my dog-eared one here. So it literally is dog-eared. I'll get rid of the little things.
That's great.
And basically, the book is available around the world, so you can get it off Amazon or any of your major online bookstores. And we wrote the book to try and bring into a book what we've been doing for 15 years with women in our healing from birth meetings. So the book is very much written to try and give you an understanding of how you feel, what they're feeling, and understanding of birth trauma, of grief and disappointment. So the whole first section is getting an understanding about all of that, and understanding that birth does have an impact, that birth trauma is very real. Why would you want to go there? What's the benefits of actually processing that, even if you're not having further children? And, just having a little bit of a touch on looking at PND and PTSD as well. And then the rest of the book is written that women can just use it in grabs, so they can just go to whatever's coming up for them right now. So we've got topics like, I feel like a failure. Why didn't my body work in labour? Or, I feel angry, or I feel sad. The things we see all the time coming up, time and time again at Birth Talk. I'll just have a look at my contents just to give you a bit of an idea. So it's kind of like those choose your own adventure type books where you go where you need to.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's written in ways you can just read what you need to read today, and then if you have to pop it on the shelf for a while, you can do that. And that's also for health professionals to do that. So like we have sections like, I feel isolated or alone. Why doesn't anyone get it? How do I share it so other people can get it? I feel angry with my health carers or my partner, or about what happened. I feel guilty. Everybody keeps telling me I should be grateful. Why did I agree to that? Whatever, epidural, episiotomy, cesarean, etc. I feel like a failure. I feel sad, dealing with sadness. I was separated from my baby. We have a whole section on breastfeeding, because breastfeeding can be so challenging after a traumatic birth.
Right. Yeah.
There's lots of factors that come into there, and then that's like a double-edged sword, like if for a lot of women, they're like, I want to breastfeed if it kills me. And then for those where that doesn't happen as well, it's like a second thing that they've process. And then we have issues with partners, what he thinks I'm tainting it. He wants me to just get over it, move on. Or my partner's traumatized as well, because partners can get, they have their own feelings about what went on. If their feelings are similar, they also might be traumatized. And then we also have special circumstances that come up, that we just thought women need a bit more, and health professionals, a bit more information around those things. So things like you said about like a home birth transfer, there's a section on that. The loss of a baby, if the baby is premature, having a cesarean under general anaesthetic, things like that. And then the third section of the book is all about tools for healing. And the second section will link you to the third section and back. So it's just built so that whatever comes up for you, you've got the tools and the understanding to be able to process that layer of the onion, so to speak, and then, go to the next one when you're ready. So,
wow.
So, and as I said, there's about 80 women and men quoted in there as well. And I think that's incredibly powerful, because it's really powerful to hear other people speaking the words that are in your mind.
Exactly.
And just not feeling alone as well. And I think that really normalizes the response you're having to what you went through.
Exactly. And I love that so much. I got chills when you were saying that. For me, I saw this kind of vision of the reweaving of sisterhood, or community in that way, where we used to, I think, be able to talk more in these ways. And it's like we can be isolated in our little, family homes. So to be able to read those stories from all around the world, that's such a valuable resource. And so great also for doulas, midwives, anyone else who's working in birth too, right? You mentioned that. So I want to grab my copy too. As soon as I get to a stable mailing address, I'm going to. When I'm not traveling. Yeah, it sounds like such a powerful resource. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, we're very, very happy to get that out there, and it's been a long time coming, but as I said, it's available on Amazon, and there's some lovely reviews on there, and we actually just had a sale for Australia and New Zealand on Friday for Birth Trauma Awareness Week. And
oh wow, okay.
We sold 200 in 24 hours, and
wow,
which is kind of telling us,
yes,
there's a lot of women out there who are needing support. 1 in 3 women are showing signs of trauma after birth,
right?
And in Australia and a lot of countries, one of the biggest causes of maternal morbidity or maternal death postnatally is suicide, which is devastating.
Yeah.
But we would say that, it's not just for women. This book is not just for women who've got PTSD or PND. It's for any woman who feels that she's got something she needs to process from her birth, because as you said, we don't have that community that we used to, and it's just empowering. It's just a powerful life event, and if any other life event we needed to process something, we would have our friends, or we'd have that support to go, wow, that was really difficult,
right?
Even if it's, some women, it might be there's certain aspects of their birth that were negative, but there's certain aspects that are positive, but that those negative aspects still deserve to be processed and to be made sense of, so that they can, not play an intense role in the rest of their lives.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Actually, I have one more question for you. You are a mother yourself, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
I have 2 daughters.
I thought so. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I just want to make sure. I'm asking everyone this. I think it's a fun question. If you could go back in time and just tell yourself one little piece of advice, sum it up in a couple of sentences, before you had your first daughter, now that you know all that you know, what would it be? You could whisper in her ear.
Oh goodness, this is a bit of a tricky one for me, because before I had my daughter, I was already a midwife, so I had a lot of insights.
Right. Okay.
So I feel very lucky in my birth that I had support and information that isn't accessible to a lot of women. So I went in very well supported, but probably the main bit of information was that with my first birth would be that birth can take different paths, and there's a very wide range of normal, and trying to stick to a time limit may not be a smart thing. And rarely do babies, as long as I was okay and my baby was okay, rarely do babies just not come out. They don't stay in there until they're 18 years old. They're going to come out. So unless there's a sign that there's actually a problem with that, I would have just liked to have a little bit more confidence that I didn't need to do certain things to make sure that they came out.
Right. I love that.
In the absence of definite risk.
Sure. Yeah, I love that advice. That's beautiful. I just recently actually supported my best friend who went like 42 weeks plus 5 days, and it was like, it can get really stressful for the woman in that last little bit, and when you're feeling intuitively like nothing's actually wrong and you're getting checked up and nothing's actually wrong, then maybe nothing's actually wrong. Good advice. I love that.
And I think that was I get what you're saying with dates, and I was floating around the 42-week dates. Meant was the length of labor. So I had
I see what you mean.
33-hour labor, with a lot of people telling me that I needed to do things because obviously my baby wasn't coming. And a lovely midwife down the track said to me, "What do you think? They were just going to stay in there until they were 18?" And I just went, perhaps I should have just had that sleep. That would have been good. But I was, again, you're in certain environments, you're in certain situations, and all you can do is make the best decisions with the information that you have at that time. And that's what we want. We want women to be making decisions from information, not from fear, and for them to understand about their innate abilities to birth and to understand about this being important, and that's going to have an impact, and that it's a life experience, and they have every right to feel safe and supported and good during that life experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. You're doing such incredible, important work in the world. And yeah, I'm just so honored that you spent this time with us and shared all of your wisdom. And I hope everyone can check out all of your beautiful offerings and book. And yeah, I know it's getting late for you too, so I hope you have a wonderful sleep in Australia.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and for presenting this summit, because it's such an important thing for women to be able to connect and to hear about birth and to, just feel that support and that understanding and get that information that it's often so regular path that most of them go down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or gets into the motion.
Oh, well,
and I'm
thanks.
so glad we got the audio.
Yeah, we had some audio issues at the beginning. Well, thanks again so much, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Nancy.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.